Thank you, everybody, for having me. For folks who don't know me, my name is Shea Belsky. I am a graduate of the Neurodiverse study that was done a couple of months ago. I see a couple of friendly faces here. I see a couple of familiar folks. Thank you once again for having me. Super excited to be here. Today, I'm going to be talking about how to build a neuro-inclusive workplace, being an ally and an advocate for neurodivergent people everywhere. Little bit of an introduction about myself. My name is Shea Belsky. I am an autistic self-advocate. I am the Chief Technology Officer at Mentra. Mentra is building a hiring platform for neurodivergent job seekers. Neurodiversity includes people who are autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, a wide range of things which describes how folks interact with the world, how they perceive the world on a social level or a visual level. It's all about describing folks who have what I consider to be a different operating system, if that makes any sense. I graduated from Cornell University in 2018, and I've previously worked at companies including Wayfair, HubSpot, Google, and IBM, just to name a few. Talking about neurodiversity, I'm going to skim over this a little bit, assuming that most folks here know the general version of neurodiversity, but only throwing a couple of new terms and definitions here to set everybody on the same page. Neurodivergent is an adjective used to describe people who are autistic, have ADHD, dyslexia, epilepsy, among a host of other things. Neurodiverse is also an adjective used to describe a group of people who are neurodivergent in different ways. What I mean by that is I, as an individual, am neurodivergent, but us here as a group are neurodiverse. All of our brains are different. We have a diverse group of brains, but I do not have a diverse brain. I have a neurodivergent brain, as in singular. Something else that I also heard earlier today was the idea of how you refer to yourself. I call myself an autistic person. Somebody else I heard say, I have autism spectrum disorder. Honestly, the idea behind these different definitions is that it is a total matter of personal preference. It is a similar but not 100% identical analogy to gender pronouns. It is a preference. I choose to say that I am an autistic person. Someone else can choose to say that they are a person with autism or they have autism. Ultimately, it is a completely personal preference. And what really helps in these regards is to ask somebody, if you're going to introduce them, how would you like to be referred to as it pertains to autism? And as it pertains to neurodiversity, because everybody's going to be different. And the worst thing that can happen is that you don't ask and then you make a mistake. But there's no harm in asking and just saying, how do you want to be introduced? As I mentioned before a little bit, you have a diverse group of people, but an individual is not neurodiverse. An individual is not diverse. An individual is divergent from the norm in this case. If you don't have the ability to copy this down right now, don't worry. I will make sure that I send out a whole link to this at the end of the presentation, so you'll have the chance to take a look at this graphic later. This is just meant as a visual representation of what it means to be neurodivergent versus neurodiverse. So don't worry if you can't capture this right now. I'll have it for you later. Talking a little bit about Mentra for a second, our goal is to connect neurodivergent job seekers with gainful employment. What sets us apart from other organizations is that we want to empower individual job seekers to advocate for themselves. 1 in 7 people around the world are neurodivergent. Of that 1 in 7, up to 40% of them are either unemployed or underemployed. And that number is as high as 80% for people who are autistic. What Mentra is trying to do is prompt employers to highlight their inclusion and help them understand what does a job seeker need to be successful to help them in the workplace and to really give them a great time. And then we also enable employers to advocate for themselves too. Why should an autistic person want to work for them? What support can they provide to somebody who has dyslexia or has epilepsy or something else? The point is, how can we create a meaningful match between a job and a job seeker that resonates, that really lands with people and goes beyond just skills or work history or education, but goes much deeper into what a person is actually like and their full authentic selves. Why do we exist? Like I said before, companies want to hire neurodivergent talent, but they don't know how to do so. Their managers don't know how to do it. Their recruiters aren't aware of it. They're scratching their heads thinking to themselves, how am I going to empower my recruiters, my managers, my teams to think in a way that promotes neurodiversity and promotes neuroinclusion. We want to address this hiring gap. And this is not a feel-good thing. It's not a charity. Mentra is a for-profit company. We were invested in by Sam Altman. You might know his name from ChatGPT, and it's okay if you've used ChatGPT for your speeches. I'm not going to tattle on you. But Sam Altman is our primary lead investor 2 years ago, and he is fully bought into neurodiversity. And it is one of the reasons why OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, is so successful. It is their secret sauce, neurodiversity, to their team, to how they run their company, and why ChatGPT is as ubiquitous as it is today. Mentra enables job seekers to help advocate for themselves. What we do is we go beyond what's just on their resume, their work history, their education, their skills, and we ask them, what are your superpowers? What are your things that make you awesome, that make you succeed, that help you kick a little bit of ass? At the same time, we also ask them, what are some things which are turn offs to you? What is going to stop you from being able to do your best possible work? What is going to get in the way? What accommodations do you need? And how can we maximize your chances for success by putting you in the right environment for you to thrive in and minimizing those distracting, possibly damaging factors? This is something that resumes don't really do a good job of communicating, and making a LinkedIn post about it is great and all, but those things can kind of get buried way down deep. And Mentra gives people a really cohesive profile, like a LinkedIn profile, to help them say, this is me, this is who I am, and also this is what I need to be successful, and this is what turns me off. It is a perfect meeting of the minds to help someone say, here's my superpowers, and then here's where I need some help. Among all neurodivergent people, there is ultimately a neurobiological difference in how information is processed. Those are a lot of words, but what I mean by that is that every neurodivergent individual is a little bit different. There's a very common saying in our community which says that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. No two autistic people are going to behave in exactly the same way. What is also true is that many of them struggle to communicate their needs in a way that actually lands with people. They might not know what to say. They might not be able to find the right words. No one listens to them. Nobody can or wants to do anything about it. And where neurodivergent folks like myself really need some help is in having people around us who want to listen, who are really willing and ready and able to understand, sit down, and just have a conversation and say, what can I do to help? How can I support you? How can I help you? And that is really the point of Mentra to a broader extent, and the movement that we are kicking off. We have 45,000 job seekers. Companies including Microsoft use us. What Mentra is doing is just the beginning of a true revolution in this space. Talking about neurodiversity for a second, I want folks to think about portrayals of neurodiversity that they see in TV, movies, books, whatever. One example you might think of could be Rain Man, a very popular example if you've seen the movie. Another example that's a little more recent and up to date is Big Bang Theory, Sheldon Cooper. What these portrayals don't really get at, though, is the authenticity. They are, unfortunately, Hollywood portrayals, very dramatized, very exaggerated, meant to play into stereotypes, meant to give people something familiar that they can see and understand and resonate with, and not fully reflect authenticity and real people who are autistic, who are neurodivergent. And these portrayals have often done a lot more harm than good in proactively starting a neurodiversity conversation. Talking about what an actual authentic representation of neurodiversity means, there's a Broadway musical out there called How to Dance in Ohio. Maybe folks have seen it. Maybe folks have heard about it. This is a musical which has seven, that's a lot of people, 7 autistic actors and actresses as the title characters in a musical all about an individual's portrayal and their experience being autistic as they embark upon a very important social event in their lives. All of these actors and actresses are autistic. A lot of the folks behind the scenes in the crew are autistic and neurodivergent. It is, I think, one of the strongest portrayals of neurodiversity that really lands, that is honest and truthful and allows them to be authentic and themselves. On the other hand, in the TV Hollywood space, we have Loop. It is a short film created by Pixar, which everybody knows and loves, depicting a non-speaking autistic girl, already a very unique portrayal that isn't often seen in Hollywood, showing how she experiences the world around her at a summer camp and the ways in which she perceives the world. This film was actually produced in conjunction with the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, and the voice actress behind the lead character is also a non-speaking autistic actress. And I think this portrayal, though brief, does an amazing job of showing this is what neurodiversity really means, and it is just one of many possible portrayals of it. Talking about neurodiversity in the workplace, I've been building it up and building it up and building it up. Now we get to talk a little bit about how this affects people in a corporate environment, in their jobs. One of the biggest challenges that people face is that their frustrations, their problems are generalized or lumped into other people's issues and kind of hand-waved away and said, doesn't matter. You can just shrug it off and do whatever you're going to do. And it's okay, when in reality, it's not okay. People have accommodations and adjustments to the work environment that enable them to be successful. What happens is that managers and recruiters perceive an accommodation as a cheat code, as an advantage given to somebody to help them perform superior to their teammates, but not necessarily as something for equity. The idea behind an accommodation or an adjustment is that it creates equity. It is not meant to make someone perform their job easier or better, but it is instead meant to enable somebody to perform their best possible work. And if that happens to mean they can perform better than their coworkers, then that's what you want. You want to maximize the chances that somebody will be able to perform at their best. If you are not able to produce that environment, then you will never get the individual's fullest potential, how effective, how meaningful they are able to work in their place. It's hard to get accommodations and have a conversation about it when it is invisible to people. I have accommodations in my workplace. It took me not a lot of time to get them, but in previous companies I've been at, it was a big hassle because people were just arguing with me. You can do your job just fine. I don't see any problems with how you're doing it right now. And I said, just wait and see how good I'll be able to work if I get this thing and that thing. And that's a hard concept for people, but it really lands once you give me what I need to be my authentic self, and then watch me soar. We talk about the strengths and sometimes referred to as superpowers of neurodivergent folks. I abbreviated it as ND here, which might be a new abbreviation for folks. ND, neurodivergent people, are passionate about the things that excite them and motivate them. Really hardworking when we're in a place that supports them and allows them to thrive and resonate. We can really approach problems and situations in ways that are unorthodox and divergent from the norm. Something that I know to be very true about myself and many of my neurodivergent friends is that when faced with a challenge, we can produce 20 different solutions to it, which are all very different from what anyone else would bring to the table, and all 20 of them would be right. Something that society doesn't always get about us is that there are multiple right ways to solve a problem that can be presented by somebody whose brain works differently. And just because you didn't think of it doesn't make it wrong. And that's something which is a strong selling point, a strong trait of folks who are neurodivergent. I want to challenge folks for a moment. Take a moment to yourself to think about someone you know who is neurodivergent. How similar are they to me or to a different person you know who's neurodivergent? As I said before, if you've met one person who is neurodivergent, you've met one person who's neurodivergent. Stereotypes, unfortunately, don't do a great job of creating these clean distinctions or separations between people who are neurodivergent. But as we are seeing in this presentation, and as we've seen in this Toastmasters group, everybody is neurodivergent, brings something different to the table. They have different strengths. They have different things which maybe rub them the wrong way. And grouping all dyslexic people, all ADHD people, all epileptic autistic people into one bucket only serves to do us harm and does not lead to a productive conversation, ultimately. It's not accurate or fair to group people, to categorize them, to bucket them into different areas just because it's easy to understand. Labels out there like high functioning, low functioning are pretty harmful ways of describing people. I might give the appearance of being high functioning in this setting. If you take me to a loud bar or a very loud concert or a place where there's 20 or 30 people trying to talk to me or around me, then I really start to shut down and have a hard time focusing on my surroundings. And it just takes up so much energy from me. So the next time you use the word high functioning or low functioning, think a little bit about who you're referring to and what you're trying to communicate with that label. Something which really lands as well is the idea of the autism spectrum versus a color wheel. Don't worry, I'll have a link to this later. The idea behind using a color wheel as opposed to a spectrum is it does not bucket somebody onto being high on the spectrum or low on the spectrum, whatever that means. Am I on one end of the spectrum or the other? If you ask 5 different people, they might have a different answer. Whereas this color wheel, what you're seeing in front of you, has categories like languages, motor skills, perception, among others. And I might excel in one of these areas and struggle in another. And this does a great job of communicating my strengths in language and motor skills and executive functioning. But maybe I struggle in a sensory environment or with perception. This is a helpful framework the next time we're talking about neurodiversity to anybody. And just keep in the back of your heads for your workplace and even your lives. If you are an ally to somebody who's neurodivergent, somebody you love, somebody you care about, somebody you just want to be able to help, in the workplace or in your own life, your options can't be limited depending on your relationship with them. If you know somebody in your workplace who is neurodivergent, it's okay to ask them, how can I create a supportive environment for you? It's really awesome to help them play to their strengths and help them understand, here's what you can do to advocate for yourself to the best of your ability. Here's what I can do to help you. Here's how I can communicate on your behalf. What you don't want to do is kind of swipe the rug out from underneath them and do their job for them without getting permission. Do your best to have a conversation with them before you do anything. Ultimately, you want what's best for them and you want to help them. And try not to assume what they need, and you might end up doing more harm than good if you do. They might encounter some issues in communicating, and they might not know what the layers of bureaucracy or red tape or legal stuff is going to be. It's okay to advocate on their behalf if they are not getting through to their manager or their mentor or some other decision maker. But again, never do anything on their behalf without asking. Just be transparent with them in that regard. If you're a manager or a boss or a supervisor of somebody who's neurodivergent, you cannot legally compel them to disclose unless you have their permission. There's a whole legal framework. I'm not going to get into it here. I'm not the legal expert here. But it understand from their perspective, what do they need to be successful? What do they need to thrive, to kick ass, to really crush it in their job? It's your job as a manager to understand what they need, go to bat for them and swing and get them their accommodations to help them communicate to people who need to know about it and help them work through strengths that they have and challenges that they have too. Sometimes they might not tell you a lot. They might just say, I'm autistic, and that's it. And then you got to ask them, okay, what do you struggle with? What are you great at? And help them understand too, because it'll help you understand at the same time. When someone's needs are really clear, it makes your job really easy. There's a whole list of things that they could need, which again, vary very much from one person to the next. The really good framework for this could be the idea of a working with me document. The idea behind this is that it allows the entire team to get on the same page. How do I, as a team, get on the same page? And this is beneficial for neurodivergent and neurotypical teammates as well. You might be shocked at what you hear your neurotypical teammates say about, this is how I need to work. This is how I need to be successful. And really helping them all get on the same page. What you don't want to do is shine a big spotlight on your one neurodivergent team member and say, you have to do this, and no one else does. Whereas when the entire team gets on board, it creates a shared sense of camaraderie and communication with everyone. If you are neurodivergent yourself, it is really important to advocate for yourself. When you say, I'm autistic, people might assume that you're Sheldon or Rain Man or their nephew who is nonverbal. You have to be aware of what you mean by that and communicate strongly to your manager, to your team when necessary about what you actually mean. Be thoughtful about disclosing, though. You don't need to tell everybody who knows unless you're confident about that. It is important to be tasteful and tactful about who needs to know, what they need to know, and why. You want to help your manager understand how you work. And that can only happen if you can communicate with them what's unique about you. What would help you work better? What helps you work more effectively with less stress? What are your turn-ons and your turn-offs? To sum it all up, I think I'm pretty close to time. Neurodiversity does not have a look. You don't look autistic, but what does that mean? If you're an ally, stand up for your neurodivergent teammates. Just listen to them, have a conversation, do what you can to act in their best interests, which starts with a conversation. And speaking of conversations, managers, I'm looking at you. You really want to help your direct reports, your teammates work their best. You succeed when they succeed. And if they don't have what you need, if you don't have what they need either, then it's going to be really tough. So honestly, the idea of working with me document, helping folks thrive is going to be awesome. If you are a self-advocate, mean what you say. You're not Sheldon. You're not Rain Man. Who are you? Help folks understand what's going on. That way they can go out and advocate for you and really help you hit home. I will make sure that this resource slide is included in whatever materials go out. Jenny, we can work on getting the details of this to other people. There's a lot of links here. I will make sure that folks get to it. And I believe that I am pretty much at my 22 minutes for this presentation. I believe we have structured time for Q&A later. So I want to say once again, thank you folks for having me. This was a really awesome time. And you can find me on the web. I am Shea Belsky on LinkedIn. There's only one of me. And I'm more than happy to stay after this talk too, to answer any questions that folks have. Thank you so much for having me.
Today we have a special panel trying to bridge the gaps between neurodivergent job seekers and hiring managers with solutions that we hopefully can crowdsource to help everyone. If our Zoom master can help spotlight our three panelists so that we can maximize some breadth and depth with their perspectives with a quick intro about yourselves.
Greetings to everyone joining us. It's great to see such a great turnout. My name is Nicole Cherlet. I'm representing the job seeker proponent in this conversation. I am in mid-career at the moment after having a roller coaster through my life, from university days working in restaurants, traveling the world and teaching English overseas, being a horseback guide, and then coming back to restaurants and finding home here in Revelstoke in British Columbia. I just closed my retail business after owning it for 10 years, and I am struggling with re-entering the workforce, just trying to find an everyday job and finding that maybe it's not just that I don't do corporate settings, but there was more to it. So I've joined the late diagnosed and getting diagnosed in the last 2 years with first ADHD and now autism as well. It's been insightful, and I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight.
Kassandra Pierre, ex-past president of the LISA's Neurodiversity affiliate. Currently work for JP Morgan in payments operations, VP. I also sit on the Cyber Guild's Diverse Minds Movement Committee, where we are trying to evangelize and advocate for women in cyber who are neurodivergent. One exciting thing, I just hired a Autism at Work intern. She'll be starting this summer. Really excited about that. And I did a panel at work yesterday about neurodiversity for Autism Inclusion Month. So it's a lot of stuff happening this month, but very excited to be here with you all tonight.
Shea Belsky, autistic self-advocate. I was early diagnosed. I am now CTO at Mentra. I have really gone on a pretty crazy journey from being basically nonverbal at a young age to now leading a startup. So it's a very drastic 180 for me in terms of my personal experiences being an autistic individual, also working in corporate America for a little bit, now leading a startup, taking on a lot of responsibility and having a lot of eyes on what I'm up to. And every day, I just hope that I'm really resonating with the mission that Mentra set out to do, and also advocating for neurodivergent folks in a way that they feel respected at and treated at fairly.
A little bit about myself. I'm a management consultant, and I started this club in part to help everyone learn more about neurodiversity, in part because my family is neurodivergent and neurodiverse, with a mix of neurotypicals or maybe not yet diagnosed. But we basically struggle with getting hired and hiring. My brother happens to be a recruiter as well. And we pulled this panel for different perspectives because these represent the common personas of you're trying to find work, you're trying to hire neurodivergent talent, and there's a solutions perspective from a technologist or anyone else in the audience. So hopefully this panel will give you some insights as to why 20% of the world being neurodivergent and tends to be overrepresented in creative and technical fields are underemployed or unemployed. And that happens to be in America as well as Canada. And I'm trying to understand, maybe from some of your perspectives, where do you see that challenge for getting hired or being found?
The challenge of being found and getting hired. Lately, my biggest challenge has been myself. I tend to talk myself out of applying because the job descriptions have what looks like a list of executive functions and social skills that match my diagnostic report and the things that I struggle with. And so it's easy for me to talk myself out of jobs that I used to feel very confident with. Once I get into an interview, I usually do pretty well, but there seems to be some misunderstandings as well, where when I ask about systems in place, because I know I like to have things written down and have a concrete pattern to how I do my work, I ask, how strong are your systems? And I am told that, oh, we have great systems in place. When I get in, they're vague, they're out of date, they're ambiguous, everyone dismisses them. Oh yeah, that's out of date. It's okay, you'll figure it out as you go. Like, no, that's not what I asked about. I asked if there was accurate systems that I could read at the detail I need. So now I slide into this idea of asking questions to clarify vague job descriptions and tasks. And pretty quickly I get into this issue where I get misunderstood because I'm asking so many questions and I should be able to remember it by now. Again, that working memory not being so strong. In my own business, I would write everything down and I systemized everything I possibly could. Other business owners were looking at me like I was odd to put this much time and effort into it. But for me, it was a natural way of doing business. Now, when I'm going to find work elsewhere and I'm seeing that value not present, I don't know how to ask those questions to make sure that I will be supported on the other side. I have no confidence in that. So I'm curious to hear from our other panelists today and see maybe a different take, because I have worked typically for smaller businesses and hospitality industry, not so much in those larger tech organizations in bigger cities.
I'll respond in two ways. I think first I'll respond from the job seeker perspective because I was just in your position. One thing, and a lot of what you shared are difficulties and stressful type scenarios that I have also experienced in my career journey as late diagnosed ADHD. But that, as you can think of, the impact of that living your entire life without a diagnosis and just trying to manage, I've struggled at work. One thing that I think has led me to being in a position now where I love my job and what I do is I interviewed for alignment with my boss and team, and secondly, the role, right? I think sometimes it's the opposite, right? We look for the right job, the right task, so we can do the things that interest us. I actually went about this the opposite way. I was looking for a boss and a supportive team. And I found that that was the linchpin to kind of help me get what I need, because it's easier for me to now have those conversations. Like, can you give me the agenda ahead of time? Can you put that in writing? Is it okay if I record this Zoom call? Do you have a reference document for that? And I preface it with, I have ADHD, I ask a lot of questions, but because the rapport is there, the inclusive environment is there, the empathy is there, the respect is there, it makes all of those things easier. If there are additional things that I would like to do, as far as responsibilities are concerned, I can then ask them to give me those additional responsibilities, right? Whereas you could go the opposite way and get the perfect job, but then you have no flexibility for the things that we specifically need in order to do well. So I found interviewing for fit, and I know we hate that word, but for my fit, what I need, right? And I literally made a list and made sure I asked those things in my interview, and figuring out and finding out that my boss was aware of what neurodiversity was and already had these inclusive practices in place, made it easier. So as a hiring manager, similarly, I try to evidence inclusion in the way I interview. I turn my captions on. I send some questions ahead of time. I ask if they want an agenda or they want it written. I say out loud, hey, if you don't want to keep your camera on, that's fine. With the responsibility of being a hiring manager also comes the responsibility of awareness and advocacy. And I think we should be as hiring managers, we should be doing the extra work to ensure that we are including everyone that comes to us to interview. You definitely have to prioritize what you need. Literally make a list. And when you go into your interviews, make sure you are asking those tough questions so that you know you are either going to get what you want or not. And if it's not for you, walk away.
Thanks so much for Kassandra, for highlighting the importance of the work environment and the accommodations and being supportive for recognizing how neurodivergent employees or talent work best. Maybe Shea, you have a different perspective from as a technologist in how they can bridge this gap.
Something which I think is very true is that a lot of the corporate understanding about neurodiversity is only recently kind of getting with the times and being up to date within the last 5 or so years. This is not related to the workplace strictly, but it's still relevant in the sense that I had a conversation with a recruiter and then someone about life insurance. And I had to have a very involved, very detailed, not quite invasive, but very specific discussion about my autism and neurodiversity and how it affects me to make it abundantly clear that my being autistic does not directly act as a disability for me. That does not mean that it's not a disability for other people. What they have to go off of is that autism is a disability, period, end of story, which is not true for every autistic individual. What I had the responsibility of doing is communicating to this recruiter, to this individual, was that in my case, it is not a disability 100% of the time. I can still lead an independent life with some caveats and some things that I need to live a successful independent life. And that was shocking. That was news to them. They're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I'm so sorry for being so invasive. And that's not their fault for being misled. It's the level of training, the level of understanding. That's why you have companies like Mentra in the world who are trying to create the easy path to understanding, the easy solutions to facilitate learning, facilitate inclusion, and make it much easier for people to understand. This is why this problem is a problem, and this is how we are trying to solve it, making it easier for people to be educated, to understand here's where this person shines and here's how they need your help. If everybody had a working with me document or a Mentra profile or something to that effect, it would allow everyone to communicate much more strongly about who they are as an individual, whether they're neurodivergent or not. It would be great for them to say, here's my turn ons, here's my turn offs. Great. Now a recruiter knows that this is a good fit for you, or maybe it's not. And it's awesome getting to build this and work alongside autistic job seekers, working alongside recruiters, HR professionals, and people who are really in deep in this space to try to make a positive difference in the world.
You hit on the nail about disability, where the neuroaffirming model of disability or social model to be more constructive than the medical model, where things are an abnormality or a deficit or liability, is that maybe it's not just a disability. Imagine a world if we could show our authentic selves, where everyone accepts us, appreciates our gifts, so that we don't have to mask or burn out. What would those advantages look like? And could we just bring out all of that productivity? You raised the point with these trade-offs. It could be because we're stressing people to work in these unideal environments or to be in these constraints to perform against other people's benchmarks that were never designed for them. So speaking of which, why don't we learn about some of the positives of being neurodivergent, your superpowers, your abilities, your unique or different abilities. I see Nicole glowing with some to share.
I've never had a quiet face. Although I'm grateful, a lot of my early times working, my first jobs were with horses, but then later when I was in university, I was working in restaurants a lot. You learn a lot about logistics and people and moving around quickly in restaurants. And I'm grateful every day for the experiences there. And it kind of plays to this idea of misunderstanding and assuming a disability versus just a difference. So I really liked how you put that, Shea. When I would start a new job and they would start getting to know me, and they would see me make a few strange, simple errors, like I'll forget names or I'll forget the recipe, and I need to hear it 5 times before I really get it in my head. So that, Nicole, I don't know if you're going to be able to handle it when it gets really busy. I don't know if you're going to be able to take it when it really hits the fan and someone really pushes you. But with my ADHD, that's when I thrive. When it is quiet and there isn't much to do and I'm bored, it's embarrassing. I frustrate myself, let alone anyone else. But you get me in a proper whiteout situation in a restaurant when you've got meal tickets from each table lined right up, and we're trying to move quick and fly and support each other as a team. I love that stuff. Engaging with in social situations when there is a clear guideline, there's a clear recipe and a protocol and a script and a choreography to it all. That is my favorite place to be. When I'm in a workplace where there isn't that choreography, where, well, every time is different, you just have to figure it out. I'm like, that's a lie. I bet you there are some recipes here. No one's just ever written them down. And coming from restaurants where that is the best practice and it's accepted, now trying to move into other workplaces and into an office setting where that is asking for extra work. Why do you need to do it so detailed? I'm getting to the point now where I just want people to believe me when I tell them that's a problem for me. It doesn't make me less than, it doesn't make me a problem, it just makes me different. And it shouldn't be such a big stretch to ask for a common agenda, for example.
Kassandra, I know you were leading the Women in Cybersecurity where they have all sorts of superpowers also. Do you want to share some that you've seen?
I didn't know that thinking in pictures and images was a thing until someone like mentioned it. And I believe I was also reading Temple Grandin's one of her books, and she talks about that. And that's something that I do. I never knew that that's what I do, but like I visualize, like images are in my head. So that's something that helps a lot. I wouldn't say I have a photographic memory, but I remember specific details about how things look. So that is one thing. I'm also a systems thinker, which makes me good at strategy and putting things together, like putting a plan in place, step by step of how something should work, which also on the flip side helps me figure out when something's missing. I'm usually the person that points out when things are missing before anyone else catches it. Extreme attention to detail. And that has been a problem at work because I will point things out and people think I'm nitpicking, but I'm not. I see it's missing. Like, that's not going to work. And I could tell it's not going to work ahead of time. And I just kind of have to sit back and wait for everyone else to realize it. I actually had a boss that told me that. Just wait for them to catch up is what they told me. And that helped. I thrive in chaos like Nicole, whereas everyone else kind of pulls their hair out. That's kind of when I ramp up to my second gear. And I almost can figure things out despite the chaos. So project management came naturally to me. It was one of the first certifications I did was Agile project management. And I can kind of come in and sort things out in chaos when other people can't. And then I think one superpower, I don't like to call it a superpower, but I think I'm just a very tolerant, open, accepting, forgiving, caring person. That's not just me patting myself on the back. I think when you've struggled in life, you are open to welcoming others in with open arms. In fact, yesterday on the panel, I did say different, not said that it's not what, we don't exist in a deficit, we're just different. And because of that, we are open and welcoming of others who are like us. And I think that is a superpower that is undervalued, just kindness. I tend to align myself with the quote unquote weirdos because I am one. That's my tribe. Nicole, I think you just have to keep looking to find that spot for you, but it's out there. Just keep looking. And one last thing, sometimes larger companies have the ability to support you in a way smaller companies don't. In the role that I'm in now, I use Mind Manager, I have Talk to Text, I have all of these really cool tech platforms that help me do my job. I don't have to take notes. I could kind of record things. I could, like, all of the things that I need that allow me to work my way, they've given me. So don't count larger companies out because they may be able to meet you where you're at.
We're not necessarily weird, as one of our guests, Francis, mentioned that we're just wired differently for our brains. We had a previous panel that chartered this club on autism at work, where one of the distinguished Toastmasters, Sam Warner, is a neurodivergent translator for information technology professionals. There's different ways of communicating with a different socially valid but equal language, different cultures, different ways of thinking. Like science and humanities is considered the two culture problem. They don't get along because they speak different languages again. Shea, if you could provide more of a broader perspective, given you see all of this talent on your platform, some of their superpowers that maybe are undervalued or ones that you think are more marketable to employers that might help shed some insight.
I'm wearing this shirt right now. Cure ableism, not autism. It's something that I believe in very strongly. Kassandra, I think the term you were looking for was different, not disabled. And that's a big point of what Mentra tries to accomplish. It's communicating one's strengths and their opportunity areas. That's problem solving, attention to detail, empathy, communication, and helping folks understand what their strengths are. I could go on forever about the strengths of autistic individuals. What I think is important to balance is not having that toxic positivity, only seeing somebody as only being with superpowers, and also the opposite is not only seeing someone as having a disability. Truth of the matter is autistic people, neurodivergent people can really get focused. They can get in the zone. I had a manager one time who told me that I was working really fast and I was kind of intimidating other people on my velocity because I could just focus in and zero in and get stuff done at quality, but at a speed way faster than anybody else could. And they kind of told me to take it down a notch. And it was a weird compliment slash comment to receive. It was so early in my career, I didn't really know what to think of it. But ultimately, when it came down to it, I wanted to play patty cake, play politics in the workplace. And I dialed it back a little bit and focused on trying to work smart, not hard. That's another superpower that I really have. Working smart and not just hard. Doesn't mean I don't work hard at the same time, but it's what to work on, where to put my energy, how to help other people do their best, find what works for them, being a workplace multiplier. That's where I really thrive. It's looking at what somebody is up to, seeing where their opportunities are to do better in, and helping motivate them to get from A to B, to help them get to a better spot where they can thrive, whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical or something else. It's helping folks understand how they can succeed at their best, knowing what I know about myself, knowing what I know about them, and knowing where they want to go.
So we've covered a little bit about some of these strengths and then the trade-offs when neurodivergent talent is forced to work in environments that are not accommodating or not bringing out their unique abilities. How can we bridge some of these gaps, this time starting from the corporation perspective, because they have a lot more resources to solve these problems?
I would say I have two things. First thing is kind of goes back to what was said earlier about neurodiversity and that exists in this collective, right? Neurodiversity speaks to the variation in cognitive abilities. It doesn't speak to a deficit. So when you understand that just by virtue of us being together, that there's going to be a variation, you, as a hiring manager, it makes me responsible to engage others in the way that they need so that I can essentially connect with everyone, right? It doesn't put the responsibility on the other person. It puts the responsibility on me to make sure that I'm being flexible to reach people where they are. That's number one. Also in onboarding and training and interviewing and recruiting, doing all of those job functions in a way that people receive the support that they need to be their best throughout that process. And then once they're hired, also providing them with that. But I think ultimately the first thing, and I'm starting to see it now, is to have more of these conversations, right? To provide the training, right? To be open, to have senior leaders in the organization come and say, hey, yes, this is something I struggle with, and I'm still able to be successful in my role, and not despite my diagnosis or not, or despite my disability, if they see it that way, but because of it, I am able to do my job and I am who I am because of that. The one thing that really impressed me about my current job is going through orientation, going through all those onboarding stuff. You think you're droning on and on and on, and then to see VPs and EDs and MDs talking about struggling with autism, or not struggling with autism, but struggling with like bipolar disorder, or having an autism diagnosis, or having a physical ailment, people openly talking about what makes them different. That speaks to an inclusive environment. It speaks to an environment where people can be authentic. Corporations should definitely prioritize training, advocacy, conversation, and representation. And I think with all of those things, we'll start making more strides towards creating environments where people like Nicole can come in and interview and fit right in.
Hearing that, Nicole, is there anything you want to add to your wish list on what would make it easier to bridge these gaps to help you get hired or find your dream job where you can thrive and excel?
It really does come down to that idea of clear communication and being able to feel safe that we can communicate. And when we ask a question or share a struggle, that it won't be misconstrued as a character flaw or insubordination. A big part of that, I think, is having clear feedback loops where if you see something, because as Kassandra was mentioning, I also am very much a systems thinker. I remember telling my counselor, I think in spreadsheets. She assured me I did not, but in hindsight, I actually ended up kind of going that way. But when you see a gap in the data and I can't help but bring it up, if I have a safe place to put it so it won't frustrate anybody else, but it gets out of my head and leaves me alone, then I can function at my best. And that feedback is captured in a way that might actually be processed and used and improve our work situation. Because as Shea said, that I work smart, not hard. And I'm a recovering workaholic, so I work smart so I can work on more things, not necessarily less things. But I need a pathway to do that so that I'm not causing trouble and challenging my boss and getting frustrated. Because when I frustrate people, especially when I'm passionate about what I'm talking about, one of the common phrases I've been hearing for so long, and I'm finally, I think, starting to get past it, is, oh, we don't need that. I don't need that. Like, I don't think you understood what I'm trying to suggest, because I would like to say that, yes, you do need that. And it would make our lives easier. But the initial reaction is that, no, we don't need that. Part of it, I think, especially having owned a business through digital transformation of the world and online shopping, I built my retail store into a hybrid model so that I could have a customer experience that was more accessible to people trying to learn something complicated like cooking. And learning the technology and seeing how much technology can support executive functions and memory challenges, I really embraced it. But I also see a lot of people, especially in the Gen X and older modes, when you learned in school on a DOS computer and had the dot matrix printers, it's really hard to really wrap your head around what cloud technology can do and how to do it safely. So I've actually been looking at and focusing a lot of my efforts on digital literacy training and helping so that some of the pushback from the older managers and employers, it's not about what I'm asking for. It really is about a language gap there of knowing what is cloud storage for a file. What is a collaborative document versus the Word document they send 5 different versions of. But I can't get upset or judge.
Were you on this job? It sounds very familiar.
It's a common refrain.
Oh boy.
I remember the days of sending essay final version 2 final. I that was still me in school.
Oh.
0.5.
Last thing too, I think what you're speaking to as well is a hierarchical structure of a lot of corporate environments where people by virtue of a title can disregard something because it comes from someone who has is a lower on the totem pole. One awesome thing about my team is that, you hear people talk about, oh, we're a flat organization. Well, my team is flat, right? Because my boss is like, there are things that I know I don't know, and I know you all know them. And when you know something, I want to know it. So please tell me. So she immediately, and I think I may have asked about that in my interview, like, tell me a time when someone on your team directly challenged something that you did because they knew it was incorrect. How did you handle that? That was like questions that I asked in my interview. And how she responded told me that she would be a safe person for me to be like, your spreadsheet's wrong. And she wouldn't fire me. Using the interview for to kind of figure those culture things out is helpful. But yeah, I lived that life, Nicole. I feel your pain. Been there.
Is there anything you can do from a technologist point of view or a solutions perspective to bridge these gaps or facilitate it so it's faster and more neurodivergent people can be hired?
I had a conversation the other day with someone who works in HR. I was asking them, do you have a ERG, an employee resource group, about disability or neurodiversity? And they did not know. They knew what an ERG was, but not if there's one with disability. And I said, you should figure that out, what's there, and you should try to set one up if it doesn't already exist. At HubSpot, I'll gush about HubSpot for a second. I talked about my neurodiversity to a recruiter there, and they knew exactly how to help me. They really knew a lot. They were very well educated. I was like, yes, I'm really, really happy already. The disability community at HubSpot, the executive sponsor, was a very vocal, outspoken individual with disability. And it produces a lot of empathy and communication. It says, if this very senior person can be so open about their disability, it was not neurodiversity, it was something else. If they are so open about it, then I, by all means, have the right to, if they have this safe, confident space to be able to do so. Promoting empathy, promoting mentorship programs of any organization for neurodivergent individuals, having leaders, like Kassandra said, be open about their neurodiversity or disability is huge. It makes it much more of a welcoming, inclusive space for folks to want to talk about their own neurodiversity, knowing that people way above them on the totem pole are also talking about and having those conversations, knowing that those leaders have their back if something goes sideways.
We have a perspective on the conversation that's been started, which needs to continue, but we're running low on time. So I'm going to ask each one of you to maybe give a quick takeaway from what you learned today from each other, or what you'd like to share with the audience to move the conversation forward.
Listening to Nicole and listening to some of the things that you've said, it really took me back to those times where I was legitimately struggling on my team for those same reasons. And I knew that something had to change with the way that I was working. I almost took on the role of interrogator for the job that I'm in now with the hiring manager. And I came with my list of things that I needed, my non-negotiables for the role, what I needed from a hiring manager and what I needed from a team, and specifically asked about those things. I was not concerned that much about the role, the job, because I knew I'd be able to do that. I can do the job. Where the problem always arose was with the team and the culture and the hiring manager. If I could give anyone who's looking for a job now any advice, it would be drill down on your non-negotiables, what that pertain to what you need from your leader and from your team, and be very, very clear to ask those questions in your interview. And if something feels off, it's not the role for you, just keep looking. Also, look for evidence of inclusion, right? Reach out to people who are currently working in the company that you want to go to and ask them, do you know anyone that works there that may have a disability that's out about it? How is that treated? How is flexibility evidenced in this workplace? How do you deal with challenges? Look for the inclusion. If it's hard to find acts of inclusion in the workplace, it's probably because it doesn't exist. And that's not where you want to be.
What I heard from Nicole was it's okay to get in your manager's face a little bit and just say, I need these things. I'm not asking for these things. It's something that I need to be successful and being not obstinate, but being specific and decisive about what you need to succeed and thrive. I think it's within your realm to shake them out a little bit and explain it like it is and be really forward with them. I really took that away.
Thank you, Jenny. And thank you everyone else for it. I feel like I got a little bit of a counseling session tonight, and it's been fantastic in so many ways, especially this idea of asking questions, like an interview question of the team, because that is the biggest challenge. Finding my own speed again and figuring out who I am now that I know more about myself, and I don't need to hide so many of my characteristics, that I can celebrate them and just enjoy being who I am. I'll leave us maybe with another stereotype or character to look to. There's a new show, it's a spin-off from The Good Wife with Elspeth, a female lawyer that is larger than life and a ton of fun colors in her wardrobe, and just her personality of how she challenges people, but with love and kindness, that I would really like to emulate. So thank you again for all the suggestions and questions tonight. I'm looking forward to the rest of the dialogue after the break.
Well, it seems like the takeaway is that we all have to learn how to communicate more clearly so that our needs are known and we don't have to assume or interpret incorrectly or mistake the intent of what people are saying or meaning. So this is perfect where Toastmasters has their education program pathways for helping people grow as prospective job seekers with making connections through networking, evaluating and feedback on your resume, mock interviews, and then also negotiating the best outcome for your compensation package, or having some emotional intelligence to understand the dynamics at work to retain your job, which is equally as hard to get one. Hopefully, this gives you a glimpse about the gaps that we're trying to bridge to continue the conversation. We will resume with some questions and answers. So I do see one question from Mercy. Restate or elaborate about the toxic positivity.
Certainly. The notion of toxic positivity is essentially looking only at someone for positive traits and ignoring something which could be negative or could be something which is not positive. I'm not sure what the right word to use is here. Ultimately, seeing autism, neurodiversity as only a superpower ignores the parts of them which require help, which require support. I have a lot of superpowers as an autistic individual. At the same time, I also do have some traits and things about me which I require support from my wife, from my family, from my friends, and a conscious effort that I take to modify my surroundings to mitigate those negative circumstances as much as possible. I am simultaneously an individual with superpowers who also has a disability. I am allowed to be both. The notion behind avoiding toxic positivity is to avoid only seeing somebody as having a disability or only seeing somebody as having superpowers, because ultimately it is both. Some individuals with autism, their disabilities might be stronger, more pronounced. For other people, it might be invisible. You'd never know they were autistic unless they said anything. And the idea behind getting rid of that notion of toxic positivity is to eliminate the chances that somebody is going to see someone for being one or the other. It is always both. It is always both superpowers and a disability. It's never in a vacuum of the other. Hopefully that makes sense.
I know there was a comment on applied behavioral therapy, which is often recommended to children or sometimes adults who are neurodivergent. Until the society understands and is aware of how neurodivergent people think, learn, and behave, how can we bridge that gap of not having to perhaps change ourselves completely, which then causes us to mask or burn out with severe health issues?
Yeah, the behavioral therapy and toxic positivity to me kind of overlap in a lot of ways. I grew up in a household that was immersed in toxic positivity, and anytime you would talk about pain or hurt or anything that wasn't sunshine and lollipops, it was cancel, cancel, gotta be careful, the universe is listening. It doesn't allow for bad things to be there. uncomfortable feelings or errors and mistakes. Oh, but Nicole, you're so smart. You'll figure this out. I'm smart, yes, but I also make mistakes. It's not a bad thing. It's not good or bad, evil versus the righteous. And toxic positivity to me is all about that, making anything uncomfortable a bad thing rather than just a thing that is an opportunity to fix things and understand a challenge so that we can put in a ramp and find that little stair that if you don't have wheels, you'd never notice it. But if we do, we can put in the ramps and make buildings more accessible. We can make activities more accessible, but only if we can let go of this moralizing of making mistakes or uncomfortable feelings a bad thing we need to get rid of, rather than something that is just part and parcel with life. The behavioral therapy I remember seeing kind of on the outskirts, just in and around the things that you were supposed to hide. And anger management was a big piece of that. And when you have big emotions, and now that I learn more about autistic meltdowns, and when I get overwhelmed and overstimulated, it's not an anger management problem. And trying to look at it that way is not going to help anyone. Whereas instead, understanding now more about what does overstimulation look like, I'm learning things about earplugs and headphones. And, maybe I don't need that many verbal streams coming at me at one time. That's not a bad thing. And it doesn't have anything to do with how smart I am.
Working in healthcare has taught me a lot of the reasons why the solutions don't always work is it doesn't always have the patient or the human being in the center in driving the solutions. Without that user perspective, you're designing the wrong solution or a solution for someone else and hoping it might work without realizing it might have some downsides or side effects or actually harm the person and their identity of who they are. And so these are really good questions to continue the conversation and debate. For our members, we continue that chat in our social media, WhatsApp, and Signal groups, but we're welcome to continue this for upcoming meetings and sessions too.
Craig is asking, how can we figure out what accommodations and systems can help us in our job, especially for those of us who have gotten by without a diagnosis?
I can add a little bit here, but I'd also be curious to hear from our panelists too. I do think that it is a journey of self-discovery, of looking at what's working and what's not. And honestly, it is a very personal thing. It comes down to experimenting, figuring out, what if I tried this? What if I did this? What if I didn't do this? Maybe you go on social media and ask, this is what I'm going through. What do folks recommend? You can go for a lot of trial and error, try to figure stuff out, and maybe you'll hit upon something which works, or maybe you'll hit upon something which doesn't. It is a very personal journey of self-discovery, and everyone's journey looks a little bit different. I have anecdotally found that places like Reddit and Facebook, which are more specialized communities for folks like myself, have been really helpful to help me trial and error this stuff so I don't have to do the actual work. That's just one option of many, but it's something worth trying.
There's no perfect answer, Craig. It's an iterative process because if you ask the doctor to write what accommodations, the doctor's probably going to ask you, well, what do you need? So it's also a self-discovery of figuring out where you work best, how you work best, what would, help you excel, and then working it out with both your manager as well as the clinician to document those accommodations, because it's also something that they may be limited in infrastructure, in awareness and understanding how to accommodate too, without the resources to enact it. If you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll try to find a way for our panels to answer them either offline or through the chat.